and the Democrats who have taken a leadership role and are joining me in co-sponsoring this legislation. I particularly want to thank my fellow senator from North Dakota, Senator Kent Conrad, and I urge our colleagues to join us and support this important measure. Thank you, Madam President.
Ask for a quorum. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Did you do that, or?
Missouri.
Madam President, yesterday about 5:30, we had all kinds of...
There's a quorum call, Senator.
Vitiate the quorum call.
Without objection.
And, Madam President, yesterday about 5:30 or so, we had all kinds of members who suddenly wanted to come over and talk about their amendments. This is an opportunity to talk about these three appropriations bills. The floor is open. There are a number of pending amendments, and hopefully members will come over and offer the amendments or talk about the amendments that they've offered. And we want to move through this legislation as quick as we can, but actually no quicker than we need to. There's plenty of time here. If members want to talk about this bill, if they want to support the bill or oppose the bill, or maybe more likely right now come and talk about the significant number of pending amendments, this is a good time to do that. And I suppose the other thing I could and should talk about that I know the chair would be happy with would be the great Cardinal victory last night. Even the cushions in the back of the chamber seem to me to be a little brighter red today than they normally are. And so maybe the Texans need to come and talk about their amendments and talk about the Rangers. But I will say that the Cardinal team from the last week or so of August until right now has been one of the true miracles of baseball history. Just going from 10.5 games from even qualifying to be the wild card in the playoffs to having almost every game from that moment on having the sense that this is the intensity of the final game of the season. So all Cardinal fans are proud. There's quite a bit of red on today here on the Senate floor. There's another Cardinal game tonight, and I wouldn't mind to watch some of it. And my best chance of doing that is if members will come over here and talk about their pending amendments now and defend those amendments. This is really in the year, it seems like to me that this week the Senate's been working as the Senate should work, bringing appropriations bills to the floor, debating those bills, letting members propose amendments, and hopefully we'll continue with these bills, the Agriculture, Rural Development, and Food and Drug Administration bill that Senator Cole and I brought to the floor, the Transportation and Housing and Urban Development bill, the Commerce State Justice bill. I think that may be Commerce Justice now, but that bill that so we've got a lot of topics here. We don't want to let this appropriations process go to one huge bill that nobody understands, nobody has time to read, and nobody has time to debate. And so hopefully with all these pending amendments we'll have that discussion, and we've had a number of votes already today, but a number of members that have things that they'd like to see discussed and voted on, and hopefully we'll begin to see more of that happen. So with that, it does appear that we don't have a quorum yet or other members to speak, and I'd suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Maryland.
I ask unanimous consent that the call of the quorum be vacated.
Without objection.
I would like to echo my comments, echo the comments of my colleague from Missouri. I, too, invite senators to come down. We are showing that we can govern. We have our appropriations bills here, and we've already disposed of 8 amendments. Actually, I think we've disposed of more than 8 by now. But we have 22 amendments pending. 22 amendments pending. If you have an amendment, come and speak to it. If you've reviewed these 22 and you oppose it, have your day, have your say, because that's what the Senate is. Due diligence, due deliberation. What we don't want is everybody, exactly as the senator from Missouri said, who's the ranking on agriculture, that everybody's going to want to come at 5:30 or 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock and want to speak. I know the leadership on both sides of the aisle would like to move expeditiously and even, if possible, finish this bill tonight. I think we've agreed that we're willing to work through the evening to dispose of amendments, but senators have to speak on their amendments. And so, again, on my side of the aisle, I would really encourage, if you have an amendment, come and speak to it. Whether you're, regardless of the side of the aisle that you're on, you oppose it, come and speak on it as well. Some of these are quite controversial. And so, again, we invite this due deliberation. But, you know, Madam Chair, everybody's really worked hard. We've done a lot in appropriations. We've ended earmarks, a topic that I know is of special interest to many of our colleagues. We have made significant cuts this year in both the continuing, as a result of the continuing resolution and other agreements, but at the same time, the subcommittees have worked hard to follow the mission of what we're trying to do in this country, have a more frugal government. I know in my bill, we have really paid particular attention on how to curb waste, and I'll be speaking about that shortly. But again, I invite my colleagues to come. I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
A quorum call on the floor of the Senate. Senators continuing work on 2012 federal spending, right now working to combine 3 measures into one. Earlier, senators also confirmed Heather Higginbottom to be the Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget. That vote in favor was 64 to 36. Senators also voting on a number of amendments related to FY 2012's federal spending. Further deliberations on the legislation throughout the day. Meantime, the death of Muammar Gaddafi has been confirmed, killed by revolutionary forces as they closed in on his hometown of Sirte. President Obama made a statement about the death of leader Gaddafi. He did that in the White House Rose Garden. We will have that statement for you at 8 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN tonight. Also, Secretary of State Clinton, making a surprise trip to Tripoli this week, said that she had hoped that Gaddafi would be killed or captured. No official recognition as of yet from the State Department. This statement also from Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. For too long, Muammar Gaddafi caused fear and suffering among Libyans and fostered instability and terror around the world. Quote, thanks to President Obama's leadership, our military strength, the cooperation of NATO allies, and the bravery of tens of thousands of ordinary Libyans who stood up to oppression, Gaddafi will never again harm another human being. With his fate sealed, it's critical that we work with our allies in NATO and the region to integrate Libya into the international community of free, democratic nations. That statement from Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid earlier today on the death of Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi.
All the quorum be vacated.
Without objection.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of calendars numbers 206 through 210, which are all post office naming bills. In other words, naming post offices if they remain open after distinguished Americans. I've asked unanimous consent.
Is there objection? No objections. Without consent, so unanimous consent, so ordered.
I ask unanimous consent that the bills be read a third time, passed in block. The motions to reconsider be laid upon the table on block, with no intervening action or debate, and any related statements be printed in the record as if read.
Without objection.
And Madam Chair, I will submit these names that have been cleared by the relevant committees and approved for the record. I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with and I be allowed to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam President, I rise in support of Senate Bill 1726, the Withholding Tax Relief Act of 2011. And I know that we are currently debating several appropriation bills, which we hope will be concluded sometime later today. But in that process, my expectation is that we're going to get an opportunity to vote on a couple of amendments that deal with the real issue, I think, that's on the minds of most Americans today, and that's jobs in the economy. The bill that I mentioned, I referenced Senate Bill 1726, is identical to the measure that was introduced earlier this year by Senator Scott Brown and Olympia Snowe, and of which I and 28 of my colleagues from both sides of the aisle are co-sponsors. Now, given that we may get a chance to vote on this legislation, perhaps in the form of an amendment to the bill that we're currently on later today, I wanted to say a few words as to why I believe this represents the right approach to spurring our economy. I think there's a right approach and there's a wrong approach to getting people back to work in this country and getting the economy growing and expanding again. American businesses need access to capital. They need to be able to deploy their existing capital as efficiently and effectively as possible. If we don't act, come January 1st of 2013, 3% of contracts between private businesses and federal, state, and local governments will be withheld. This means that dollars that could be reinvested by businesses in new equipment or new employees will instead be used essentially to give the IRS an interest-free loan. The Joint Committee on Taxation estimates that permanently eliminating this burdensome withholding requirement will allow taxpayers to keep an additional $11.2 billion over the next 10 years. Now, while 3% of a contract may not seem like a large amount, consider that for many businesses, 3% could be their entire profit margin. In effect, the withholding requirement, if we allow it to take effect, will result in a large transfer of funds from local economies all across this country to the Internal Revenue Service. Imposing this new wealth transfer makes absolutely no sense while our economy remains very fragile. The good news is that there is broad bipartisan support for repealing the 3% withholding requirement. The Obama administration's Office of Management and Budget just last month released the President's jobs plan entitled Living Within Our Means and Investing in the Future. On page 8 of this document it reads, "The President's plan calls for the Congress to remove burdensome withholding requirements that keep capital out of the hands of job creators." Madam President, I could not agree more. Unfortunately, the details of the President's plan, as introduced by Majority Leader Reid, only provides a one-year delay in implementation of the withholding provision. American businesses need more than a one-year delay. They need certainty. This is the reason that a long list of businesses and trade groups support this legislation. In fact, a document prepared last week by the House Ways and Means Committee lists 170 businesses and groups supporting repeal of the 3% withholding requirement. This diverse list includes groups such as the American Farm Bureau, the American Bankers Association, the Associated Builders and Contractors, the American Gas Association, the American Ambulance Association, just to name a few. It should be no surprise that this bill also enjoys broad bipartisan support. The House version of the bill, likely to be voted on next week, has 269 co-sponsors, 62 of whom are Democrats. In the Senate bill, there are a number of both Republican and Democrat co-sponsors, and the bill is fully offset by rescinding unobligated discretionary funds. This is the same offset that we have voted on in February when Senator Stabenow proposed it to pay for repeal of the 1099 reporting requirement. That vote passed by 81 to 17, with 34 Democrats voting yes. So to summarize, Madam President, we have a bill before us that we will soon vote on that will allow businesses to keep more of their own funds rather than sending them in advance to the IRS. That is broad bipartisan support that is fully offset, using an offset that's supported by a majority of both Republicans and Democrats in this chamber. So why would we not want to enact this legislation as soon as possible? I would note that this approach stands in stark contrast to the mini-stimulus bill that is being proposed by the Majority Leader. The Reid bill goes in exactly the opposite direction, as it would raise taxes on the private sector to pay for new spending on the public sector. Now let's think about that for a minute. We all agree that the private sector creates the vast majority of jobs in this country. And since the beginning of the recession, there's been a decline of 5.4% of private sector jobs, or 6.2 million jobs lost. However, during that period, government jobs at all levels declined by less than 2%. And federal government jobs, if you can believe this, increased by over 2%, or by 63,000 jobs. So the federal government is getting larger at the same time that the private economy is shedding jobs. So we all want to find ways to help public sector employees, but let me suggest that we need to do it without imposing new burdens on the private sector at a time we should be focused on finding ways to promote private sector job creation. The Withholding Tax Relief Act will do just that. This measure will promote job creation by allowing businesses to keep more of their capital, and it will send a message that Washington understands that promoting the private sector is the key to reviving our economy, not another government bailout. Only 8 days ago, we voted in favor of the 3 pending free trade agreements, votes that garnered broad bipartisan support, in which we all agreed will do a lot to stimulate the economy and to grow jobs here in this country. During my remarks as part of that debate on those agreements, I noted that we were setting a precedent that I hoped we would be able to continue in the weeks that would come. I noted that instead of considering divisive and controversial measures, such as the President's new surtax on small businesses and job creators, we should be considering legislation that helps our economy and that can actually become law because it has strong bipartisan support. That was true of implementing legislation for the 3 trade agreements that the President will sign into law tomorrow, and it's true of the Withholding Tax Relief Act of 2011. Let's take this opportunity, Madam President, to demonstrate that when we're willing to work together, we can enact legislation that will help to spur economic activity and to create jobs in the private sector economy. And we can do this without new taxes and without new burdensome regulations. We can accomplish it simply by getting the government out of the way of American entrepreneurs. Let's help Americans in a free and open society do what they do best: take risks, create business opportunities, and grow our economy. We don't need yet another stimulus bill heavy with government spending. We just need a little common sense, and passing the Withholding Tax Relief Act is a good place, Madam President, to start. And so when these amendment votes come up later today, I hope that my colleagues on both sides will recognize the importance of stimulating and spurring activity, economic activity in the private sector, getting our entrepreneurs in this country, giving them incentives to create jobs by keeping the tax burden, the regulatory burdens low, and move away from this notion and this idea that the way to get the economy growing again is to spend more government money, to come up with yet another stimulus plan, which we know doesn't work. We've seen that picture before, Madam President. We know many of these same types of ideas were tried, and they have failed. Unemployment today is over 9%. Back when the first stimulus bill was passed, a lot of contentions at the time were that this would keep unemployment under 8%. The exact opposite has happened. We've got more people unemployed since the stimulus bill passed, over 1.5 million more unemployed Americans than when it passed, and we should recognize that those types of remedies are not the correct prescription for America's economy today. The correct prescription for America's economy is to get our entrepreneurs, our small businesses back out there investing their capital, buying new equipment, creating jobs for American workers. And the way that we do that is to make it less costly, cheaper, easier for them to create jobs rather than harder. And unfortunately, too much of what's been happening in Washington of late is making it not easier but harder because of all the economic uncertainty that's created here by tax policy, regulatory policy, and this is a good example, putting in place yet another withholding tax, having that to plan for, knowing that that's going to take effect come 2013, and now layered on top of all those other things, you've got the new health care mandates. Many small businesses across the country are saying we are not going to hire people until we know with greater certainty what the impact of the health care reform bill is going to be on us and our employees. And so, Madam President, this is a clear winner, something that, as I said, enjoys broad bipartisan support. The way in which it is paid for has enjoyed broad bipartisan support before. I hope that we will be able to pass it today, and I hope that we will defeat what I think is the ill-conceived approach proposed by the majority leader, and that is to try and put a tax on job creators. A tax on job creators, the people who are out there who have the capital to put people back to work, and to invest in more government spending, more government programs, all of which have proven that they don't work. Let's do what works. Let's use a little common sense. Let's get American people working again. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Hawaii is recognized.
Madam President, as we continue to debate the three FY 2012 appropriations bills, I'd like to take a moment to congratulate the managers of these measures and to urge my colleagues to continue in the current bipartisan spirit as we seek to work additional bills in the coming weeks. Building on the progress we have made this week will make it less likely that we will be forced to resort to an omnibus or year-long continuing resolution down the road. The bills we are considering are both bipartisan and fiscally responsible. Senator Cole and Senator Blunt have worked together to produce an agriculture bill that is $2.2 billion below the President's request and $141 million below the FY 2011 enacted level. Senator Mikulski and Senator Hutchinson have managed a Commerce Justice Science bill that is $5 billion below the President's request and $631 million below the FY 2012 enacted level. And Senator Murray and Senator Collins have crafted a transportation housing bill that is $677 million below the President's request and $117 below last year's. As noted by the leadership of the respective subcommittees, all three of these measures were approved by the full committee with overwhelming bipartisan support. These measures reflect the austere fiscal environment that we face. They are consistent with the framework established by the Budget Control Act, which established a discretionary spending level that is $7 billion below last year's level. Madam President, all three of these bills present difficult choices. These bills are focused on a number of basic priorities: job creation, public safety, nutrition, housing, and transportation. And yet, despite the importance of these initiatives to the lives of every American, many worthy programs were either reduced or eliminated to meet our austere limits. Some have argued that our national debt demands even further cuts to these vital areas. However, every credible nonpartisan analysis has concluded that any real solution to our fiscal problems lies with reforming mandatory programs and raising additional revenues, not cutting investments in roads and bridges and public safety any further. But to date, the entire focus on deficit reduction has been on discretionary spending. Those who advocate further cuts must look elsewhere, even if it is more politically painful to do so. It is my firm belief, Madam President, that another round of ill-advised cuts to discretionary spending will quite simply put our nation's security and economic future at risk. Madam President, in addition to the managers of these three bills, I'd like to thank the leaders on both sides of the aisle for their support in bringing these measures to the floor this week. As the House has not enacted on the Commerce Justice Science or the Transportation Appropriations bills, the package we consider today is a creative bipartisan solution that enables all senators an opportunity to offer amendments. As always, the closer we get to regular order, the better our final legislative product will be. It is important that the Senate has an opportunity to debate these three measures and to focus on the matters that are germane to the bill. Madam President, when we complete action on this bill, there will be 7 outstanding committee-reported Senate appropriations bills, and it is my hope and my intention to move forward with additional appropriations measures when the Senate returns in November and demonstrate to the American people that Congress is able to complete its work in a responsible manner. Once again, I wish to commend the Chair and the ranking members and their staffs for their fine work on this measure. Madam President, I yield the floor.